Hassan. So this is about Nicolai's take on this in the teachings. Is that right, Hassan?
Yes, absolutely. So there's been a bit of a debate on this issue on YouTube, on Twitter,
and elsewhere. A bit.
My qualifiers. But I just wanted to ask you. So you have a pretty lengthy discussion of the term Injil in the Quran in your dictionary, and I just wanted to ask you, basically, what do you think the Quran imagines the Injil to be? Is it merely a reference to the words of Jesus? Is it a scripture, like a written scripture? Is it the Christian Bible? Maybe it's a scripture and the contents of the scripture the Quran doesn't specify or go into detail about. But how do you think the Quran imagines the Injil?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that exercise was inspired by Mohsen Ghurazi's excellent dissertation on the term kitab in the Quran, right? So he famously argues that the Quran only recognizes two earthly kitabs, the Torah and the Quran itself. So the Injil isn't part of that. So what I took away from that dissertation, which I really liked, is that you cannot trust your assumptions. The things that you would naturally just take as read. So maybe he's right that actually maybe the Injil isn't fully a kitab like the Torah. I don't know. I mean, I think that could be debated, but I think it's a very healthy injection of skepticism. So with the Injil too, I then try to just do that and sort of countenance some other possibilities. Obviously, one would maybe naturally assume that the Injil is, the gospel, maybe the four gospels, so maybe the New Testament or parts of the New Testament. But when you then actually look at what the Quran says about the Injil, which isn't very much, then I think other possibilities exist, right? It could just be the Christian edition of the Torah, which I suppose would then also maybe throw an interesting light on what Mohsen's arguing, right? It would simply be the kind of the a re-edited version as it were of the Bible. So I think that is compatible with the evidence that the Injil isn't certainly it doesn't seem to be just the life story of Jesus, right? I mean, that's even though that's what the gospel would maybe convey, that the Quran doesn't seem to view it like that. So I guess we do need to not fall into that we must not fall into that etymological fallacy of assuming that just because Injil is derived from Evangelion, it therefore must refer to parts of the New Testament as we have it.
The Diatessaron.
It's mentioned alongside, the giving, Nazala is used in various forms with respect to Injil.
And it does seem to be
scriptures. What do you make of that?
No, and it does seem to be a scripture that's in the possession of a community, right? The Ahl al-Injil in Surah 5, I think that's probably the Christians. So it does seem to be the Christian canon, and as such, it seems to function similarly to the Torah and to the Qur'an. So I think maybe on the tail end of that debate you've referred to, which I haven't followed, I had some very interesting. I get interesting emails by people sometimes. So this was somebody who apparently there had been a debate on the integrity of the Torah and the Injil in the Quranic presence. And so this, very, stimulating correspondent argued, and I agree with that if the Quran appeals to Jews and Christians to apply the Torah and the Injil, that kind of presupposes that there's enough that's integrally left of those scriptures in the Quranic present.
Sorry to jump in, but it's that verse in Quran 5 says liyahkum Ahl al-Injil bima anzal Allah. So that hakama, they should rule or
So the Quran doesn't seem to have Ibn Hazm's idea that the Torah and the Injil were subject to sort of textual falsification in the distant past, and now God knows, and we just can't reconstitute it. I mean, the Quran seems to be fairly optimistic that what's there right now is you can actually work with.
So you think that it is in some sense a written scripture in the possession of a community, but the contents of which we can sort of only speculate about.
Yes, and I think the Quran there, I mean, I think it's generally a feature of maybe scriptural religions that sometimes adherents of a particular scriptural religion don't have a very precise view of what's actually in the scriptural canon. So on the assumption that the Quran maybe has a slightly vague view of the Christian scriptural canon, I think that could be taken to just mirror what Christians on the ground maybe were assuming. Yeah.
In fact, in Arabic-speaking Christian communities today, people will sometimes refer to the whole Bible as the Injil, or the whole.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I think usage varies from country to country.
That's interesting.
Make a quick comment about that last point, and then Hassan, I think we should transition rapidly to questions.
Absolutely. So, I've got a number of questions ready from
give me just 30 seconds to make a comment, and then they're really great questions in the chat. So thanks to everyone for being here. And we still have about maybe 35 minutes, so we're going to get to a bunch of questions. I just first of all, everyone, now that I've complimented you and flattered you for being here, take a moment to go to Exploring the Quran and the Bible on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. So do me that solid. And then my comment is just the latter point was actually really interesting and not only relevant to the question of Injil, namely, should we expect only one take on a certain question in the Quranic corpus? So, and I mean, maybe it's a chip on my shoulder in terms of the field of Quranic studies. I feel like it's legitimate for a Muslim believer, for theological reasons. I mean, this is a source, the Quran, along with Hadith and intellect and other things. These are your sources for theological thinking. So therefore, you're looking for coherence. But those working in a historical critical model, I still feel like lots of folks, they insist on finding coherence on this question or other questions. I don't know if you want to push back on that a little bit. I find that like, you're begging the question, you're assuming there's coherence, and you're going to find it at any cost. You will find coherence. I find that I don't know. Maybe you've assumed the question before you've thought about it fully.
No, if I could comment on that? I mean, I think that's a really important hermeneutic question. I mean, I think the sort of the proof of the pudding is in the price of the pudding. I mean, what's the cost of coherence? So I do think that when we're in the business of interpreting texts, which I think we assume to be intelligible human utterances, there's a certain constitutive kind of hermeneutic charity at play in general, which means that maybe you start out by assuming that this is reasonably coherent and intelligible and intelligent, and then maybe you make subtractions from that when you can't get things to add up. So I don't think that's necessarily just something that I would apply to the Quran. I've applied that to other works. It just makes sense to me that just as you encounter another person who's talking to you as somebody whose ideas are in some form of sort of touch with reality, right, are not crazy, even though at some point you might have to sort of maybe make allowance that they are. I think you begin with assuming coherence, and then if the price of maintaining that becomes too high, then you can assume that there's maybe tensions or contradictions. And so I find it that often in the case of the Quran, there's maybe two statements, two passages, and there's two ways of reading that seem roughly equally plausible. And then I think it does become maybe a voluntaristic decision at some point. What do you go for? I think it would be legitimate, not just for religious reasons, but simply for reasons of, I don't know, sort of just textual hermeneutics, when in doubt, to go for the reading that maximizes coherence, that is maybe slightly more charitable. I mean, I think there's a few interesting examples we could talk about, but that would be my general sort of attempt at a hermeneutic answer to that. I don't think you just need to. I don't think the only reason of sort of maybe grounding a certain type of coherence is in religious assumptions about the Quran being a revealed text. I mean, it's not a revealed text to me. I'm not a Muslim believer, otherwise I'd be praying 5 times a day. But it's a text to me that I find eminently plausible, and I suppose as with any text, I would give it the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the analogy to meeting a person, and just add one more thought there, that with a person you have one person, and it's possible. And I mean, I guess part of my thought is that you shouldn't eliminate from the beginning the possibility that there's more than one voice in the Quran.